Today's team is the Cleveland Browns. To end the show today, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be doing the 8th installment of the Front Office Frenzy. And if you're new here to the segment, it's a segment where I pull a team at random, pretty much out of this hat. You can see the little slips of paper there through the camera. I basically pull a team out of a hat, and at random, in 15 minutes or less, I have to lay out a logical and reasonable game plan for that team to be contenders and in the playoffs this next season. And I have basically no notes in front of me. I've got the record of the team. I've got the cap space, according to overthecap.com when I looked up all of this a couple of weeks ago. I have the amount of draft picks in this upcoming draft, and I have one or two more bullet points, either difficult names to remember or something that really important that I need to know that kind of helps guide me along in the segment. I got my wish today. I absolutely got my wish today. This is an easier team. This is actually a really easy team to do today. We're not going to have to take a whole bunch of time on this at all. We could probably breeze through this one. The Cleveland Browns were 11-5 in 2020. They made the playoffs. They beat the Pittsburgh Steelers in the wild card round, and then they lost to the Chiefs in a narrow margin. I think it was 22-17 in the divisional round. They have about $20 million in cap space according to overthecap.com, and they have 9 draft picks in 2021. I guess the biggest thing to know is, the Browns are in a really great position heading into this next season. They have a lot of draft picks, they have some cap space to work with, and realistically, all they need to do is plug and fill gaps in players that they feel like they can let go and sign other players, find some better chemistry players for the team. So all they really need to do is plug and fill all these gaps that are going to occur this year in free agency, because obviously you can't keep everybody on the team. There is somebody that's going to leave somewhere. And that someone that might leave somewhere is potentially Odell Beckham Jr. And I think that's probably the biggest question mark that the Browns have in this situation is what to do about Odell Beckham Jr. If the Browns trade OBJ, if they cut or trade OBJ, they will save $15 million in cap space. He has no guaranteed salary. I think he gets some guaranteed salary on March 20th, so that's 3 days after the new season starts. So they'll have about 3 days to either find a trade for him or cut him if that's what they want to do. They'll save about $15 million in cap space. And more important, the argument for letting go to OBJ is the fact that, look, OBJ was injured. He was injured since week 7. He missed, 9 weeks of the football season, and the Browns made the playoffs. They seemed okay without him. Baker Mayfield still had a very strong season, probably a rebound season, a season to at least secure at least a couple more years as a starting quarterback in the NFL. The Browns looked like they were actually in some ways better without Odell Beckham Jr. in a lot of areas. But one of the biggest problems was that when OBJ went down, the Browns also lost their pretty much their only vertical threat on offense. So, the idea that, okay, the Browns need a vertical threat, who would you want to fill that gap? It's like, how many other players are going to be better than Odell Beckham Jr.? So that's like the give and take in terms of the reasons why you would want to release Odell Beckham Jr. as opposed to the reason why you would want to keep him. And, I'm going back and forth right now on which one I would prefer. I think I would probably give OBJ another season. I know that the Browns looked fine without Odell Beckham Jr., and I think logically speaking, the Browns front office is probably looking at it in a similar fashion in which they're saying, look, this guy's a $15 million cap hit. We can cut him and have no dead money this season. Why don't we just do it and use that money to fill in other places? I can totally see a world in which that happens, and Kevin Stefanski and the Browns front office say, look, we love you, OBJ, but I think it's best that we part ways. I can totally see a reality in which that happens, and it would make logical sense. But logically speaking, the Browns, as much as the Browns played well without Odell Beckham Jr., a lot of Browns fans will be quick to point out that they really had no vertical threat last season, and there's nobody there. Well, not nobody, but there's very few people in the league that can be a vertical threat like Odell Beckham Jr. can. So I think that You take your bet that, Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham Jr. can coexist. Not that they can't coexist, but, there's a lot of talk about, are you feeding a receiver the football? Does that change how the offense flows? I would give it a year to see if this newly reformed Baker Mayfield, who has kind of figured out his place in the Browns offense, and Odell Beckham Jr. can coexist on the same team and be very productive together. So I think you give OBJ another year. I think you give him a chance with Baker Mayfield to explore what they can do, and I think it makes them a dangerous team more overall. Obviously they've got a tremendous offense with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and Rashard Higgins, who's a free agent, and Jarvis Landry as well. So they have a lot of pieces there. I think Odell Beckham Jr., you take that cap hit. He's already signed, so it's not like you're adding more of a cap hit. So I think I would keep OBJ for another season at least. So that takes us to the free agency side of things. Probably the biggest free agent that the Browns have is Olivier Vernon, who is very expensive. He tore his ACL in week 17. He will probably want to move on in free agency anyways. The odds, if you're going to re-sign him, the odds is that you re-sign him for like a $2 million 1-year deal, and you get Olivier Vernon for maybe the back half of a season, because the sad and tragic thing about Olivier Vernon is that he had his injury at the end of the season, so his rehab is going to continue into the next season. So maybe you re-sign Olivier Vernon at a cheap price, but regardless, you're going to have to pay him eventually after that. So I think you probably can be comfortable with letting Olivier Vernon go, and that's kind of the dark side and the business side to football. Since the Browns have $20 million in cap space, they have a lot of capita to re-sign the players that really stepped up and were really big depth pieces for the Browns with all the injuries that they had on defense this year. B.J. Goodson, he played great as a linebacker for the Browns. He kind of got exposed a little bit with the in the divisional round against the Kansas City Chiefs. He couldn't cover some of the faster Chiefs wide receivers. So he's a little bit slow, but he played great when he needed to. So re-sign B.J. Goodson. You have two safeties that are also hitting free agency. You're getting Grant Delpit, which is, I believe, your first or second round pick from last year, who didn't play the entire season because of an injury. So you have Delpit coming back. You have Greedy Williams coming back. So maybe re-sign Terrence Mitchell as well, who also stepped up in Williams' absence. So again, you can sign some of these players to a little bit of a more rewarding deal. You have the cap space to do it. So re-sign B.J. Goodson, re-sign Terrence Mitchell, re-sign one of the two safeties that you have hitting free agency. So Andrew Sendejo, I think you probably would be comfortable re-signing. And then if you, on the offensive side of things, if you want to re-sign Rashard Higgins, you can. I think you could probably find somebody like Rashard Higgins in the draft. I think he's replaceable. As much as he performed for the Browns with Odell Beckham Jr. down, I think that you could probably find another replacement for him in the NFL draft this season and get similar results, especially if you decide to keep Odell Beckham Jr. If you cut Odell Beckham Jr. and you have that $15 million in cap space, by all means, resign Rashard Higgins, because you're going to need a solid receiver opposite to Jarvis Landry, who plays in the slot most of the time anyway, so... And you still have Donovan Peoples-Jones there as well, who's okay. But if you're cutting OBJ, re-sign Rashard Higgins. If not, you could probably, if you're not cutting OBJ, you could probably find another cheaper option than Rashard Higgins in the NFL draft. And I guess the only other need that you would need in free agency is a defensive end. If you're letting go of Olivier Vernon, he's injured. He's going to be expensive down the line. You could probably find like a mid-level pass rusher to go across from Myles Garrett. Maybe somebody like, what is his name? It's a edge rusher from the Patriots. It's something Junior. This is this part of the segment that really sucks because you're thinking of a name and you can't research it. I have to move on at some point. I can't just sit here, stuttering like an idiot. Deatrick Wise Jr. That's his name. Ha! We got it just in time. Deatrick Wise Jr. He's more of a exclusive pass rusher. He did well in New England the past season. I think it might be a good investment to see if he can be an opposite pass rusher to Myles Garrett, because look, Myles Garrett is going to get double teamed, even triple teamed, no matter what. So if you have a competent pass rusher on the other side, it makes things a lot easier. I mean, the Browns were only 15th in the NFL in sacks the last season, even with Myles Garrett there and with Olivier Vernon playing the entire season. So you have some capital to try and move on there. And then the rest of your needs really go in the draft. The Browns have a lot of draft picks this year. They've got 9 picks. I think they've got 2 picks in the 3rd round as well. So with your 1st round pick, I think they draft number 26. If he's available, I think the kid from Notre Dame, the linebacker from Notre Dame, he's got an extremely weird name, and I know that I'm going to completely butcher this. It's like Jeremiah Owusu Karamoa. It's a linebacker from Notre Dame who's got a lot of upside. He's really speedy. And if there's one thing that we saw with the Browns in their game against the Chiefs, it's that they didn't really have any speedy vertical linebackers. And I think that this kid coming out of Notre Dame would be a great fit for the Browns in that situation. I just don't know if he's going to be available for the Browns at that spot. I've seen a lot of mock drafts with him going somewhere in the second 10 picks, so anywhere from 10 to 20 that he can be going in. I've seen him go to the Dolphins. I've seen him go to not the Lions. I've seen him go. I can't remember the team now. I'm trying to draw on this memory of the mock draft. But besides that, moving on. So this linebacker for Notre Dame would be a great pick. If not, I think you probably want to take the highest rated defensive end on your board that's still available. There's a lot of them that could go in the 1st round this year. So whether that's Kwity Paye, whether that's Gregory Rousseau, if he's still there, whether that's Rashad Weaver, if he's still there, I think you take the highest defensive end on your board at that point if you can't get Jeremiah Owusu Karamoa. I think that's how you say his name. Round 2. This is where I think I would invest in another wide receiver, maybe somebody like Kadarius Toney out of University of Florida if he's still available there. I think Kadarius Toney has a tremendous amount of upside. He's a great playmaker. If you decide to cut OBJ, I think that would be a nice young replacement for OBJ. There's no way to tell if he's going to be as talented as that, but still, it's an option. He might fall to you in the 2nd round because he does have a bit of an injury history, but I think if he stays healthy in the pros, he's going to be a really nice star for whoever he goes to. I think the Browns would be a nice place for him, especially with a lot of play action, playmaking ability. That's the type of offense that the Browns like to run. And, in the 3rd round here, as we wrap up the segment, I think you can probably invest another pick at the cornerback or safety position, regardless of how, many people you sign in free agency or how many of those people you re-sign in free agency. Again, I talked about earlier in the segment, the Browns probably want to re-sign those people who came up and stepped in while their stars were out. So while Grant Delpit was out, you had Sendejo step in. While Greedy Williams was out, you had Terrence Mitchell step in and play reasonably well. So re-sign those guys. I would spend a pick on either a safety or a cornerback in the 3rd round. You do have 2 3rd-round picks, if I remember correctly. I think I actually have that in my notes. Yeah, I do. They have 2 3rd-round picks. So other than that, maybe you might even want to take another tight end, like take a Y tight end in that 3rd-round slot to go across from Austin Hooper, who played okay. He had an okay season. I'm not thrilled with Austin Hooper, but maybe you can grab a tight end in the 4th round that is a good blocker, will help with the run game with Nick Chubb, and also can break out in pass formations as well, apart from Austin Hooper. And I think that the Browns are very well set. I mean, they've got the cap space, they've got the draft picks, they've got a lot of talent, clearly, and I think they are absolutely contenders, regardless of what I would do in this offseason. But that's the segment. I take a logical game plan for a team randomly in 15 minutes or less. I think we hit our marker today, so that's been the Browns for this episode, or this installment rather, of the front office frenzy. Tune in next time to see if we do your team next. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this segment from the Hard Headed Sports Podcast. You've heard what I've had to say. Now I'm interested to hear what you think as as well. If you enjoyed this highlight from the show and want to watch more highlights from the show as they come out after the show's completion, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all very soon.